The folder slipped from Naomi Carter's hands before she even understood what she was holding. It happened in the east wing of the Calloway estate on a Tuesday morning, so quiet she could hear her own shoes against the marble. Rain had passed through before dawn, and the windows still wore a thin film of it, turning the morning light soft and gray across the bookshelves. She had been told to dust the study. Only the study, nothing on the desk, nothing near the safe. But the folder had been sitting too close to the edge, and her elbow caught it on the turn, and 40 pages of merger documents scattered across the floor like a deck of cards thrown by an angry hand. She dropped to her knees immediately, gathering pages with both hands, her heart already running faster than her fingers could move. The paper was heavier than it looked, the kind of stock lawyers used when they wanted a document to feel permanent. Somewhere down the hall, a clock chimed the half hour, and the sound felt enormous in the silence that followed. She was still on her knees, 3 pages out of order in her lap, when Desmond Calloway walked in. "Don't move," he said. Not loud. He never raised his voice. That was the thing the staff always warned each other about. Mr. Calloway doesn't yell. He just looks at you like he's already decided what you're worth, and the number isn't high. "Sir, I can explain. Those pages had an order." His voice stayed level, but something underneath it had gone cold. He crossed the room in 4 strides and crouched beside her, close enough that she could smell rain still clinging to his jacket from whatever errand had kept him out before sunrise. 3 months of negotiation. If even one signature page is creased wrong, the other side will use it to walk away from the deal. "I'll fix it. I'll stay all night if I have to. You don't understand what you've done." He gathered pages himself now, not because he trusted her hands, but because he didn't trust the next 10 minutes to anyone else. His jaw was tight, his eyes moving fast across each page, as he reordered them by some private system only he seemed to know. This isn't a vase you can replace. This is $40 million of trust, and trust doesn't dust off. Naomi's chest tightened. She thought of her mother's voice, not blood, but the only mother she had ever known, telling her once, "A job is a door, child. Don't let pride slam it before you've even walked through." "I need this job, sir," she said quietly. "Whatever it costs me, I'll pay it." He looked up at her then, really looked, the way a man looks at a number he's about to write down. "Then you'll pay it," he said. 90 days. You'll work directly under my house office until the Hartwell deal closes, unpaid, on top of your regular wage, until I decide the debt is settled. If you refuse, you can collect your final check today." She thought of the rent. She thought of the after-school program her cousin's son needed, and the program fee that was already late. She thought of how few doors stayed open for a woman with her resume in a county like this one. She thought, briefly and without wanting to, of how easily a man like this could end a career with nothing more than a phone call to the right person. "I accept," she said. The Calloway estate sat on 400 acres outside Savannah, the kind of property where the silence had a sound of its own, gravel under tires, wind through pecan trees, a fountain that ran even when no one was there to hear it. Desmond had inherited all of it at 26, the year both his parents died in a plane that should never have flown in that weather, and he had spent the 11 years since turning grief into discipline. He ran Calloway Holdings the way some men run away from a house fire, fast and without looking back. His blind spot was simple, and he never named it. He believed that control was the same thing as safety. If he managed every detail, no one could surprise him the way that phone call had surprised him at 26. He didn't trust easily, and he had stopped expecting anyone to stay around long enough to be trusted. He kept his staff well paid, and his distance wider than the estate itself, and he told himself that was kindness, not avoidance. Naomi's days under the debt, as the staff began calling it, were long. She organized his correspondence, proofed contracts before the lawyers saw them, learned which coffee he actually drank versus which one he ordered out of habit when guests were watching. She was efficient in a way that made the house staff nervous and made Desmond, slowly, curious. She kept one thing on her at all times, a small handkerchief, soft with age, a single embroidered letter in the corner, a looping, faded M. Her mother had given it to her the day she explained, gently, that Naomi hadn't always been Naomi. "You came to me, with this in your fist," her mother had said. "I never knew why. I only knew you were mine to keep safe." Naomi had never learned to read the letter as anything but a mystery. She kept it folded in her bag like a question she'd given up trying to answer, the fabric gone thin at the creases from years of being turned over in her hands during the hardest nights. "You always have that with you," Desmond said once, watching her tuck it back into her bag after a long night finalizing the Hartwell file. The lamp on his desk had burned low, and outside the window the pecan trees were nothing but black shapes against a darker sky. "Something my mother gave me," she said. "I don't know the whole story. Some things stay lost until the truth is ready to find them." He didn't ask again, but he remembered it, the way he remembered every detail he didn't yet understand the use of. Felicia Drummond, who had run his house office for 9 years, watched the exchange from the hallway without either of them noticing. She had built her entire position in this house on being indispensable, the only one who knew which lawyer to call at midnight, the only one who remembered the names of every donor at the annual gala, the only one Desmond had ever trusted with the household accounts. She had given the Calloway family 9 years of her life, and she had quietly decided, long before Naomi ever arrived, that the position would belong to her until she chose to leave it. A girl who fell into the house by accident, who fell, period, into rooms she had no business being trusted in, was not a coworker. She was a threat wearing an apron. The small things began the way small things always do, easy to explain away, one at a time. A driver who usually nodded to her now wouldn't meet her eyes when he opened the car door each morning. Felicia started routing Naomi's tasks through a side channel instead of the usual system, always with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just helping you learn the ropes," she said, the third time it happened, and Naomi let it go because she needed these 90 days to end clean. Then the schedule changed without warning. Naomi arrived one morning to find a meeting she'd organized for Desmond moved an hour earlier, with no note, no call, nothing but a blank space, where her name should have appeared on the confirmation email. When she asked Felicia about it, the answer came smooth and immediate. "I must have forgotten to copy you." It happens. It happened twice more that month, always small, always explainable, always leaving Naomi one step behind in a house where being one step behind could cost a person their footing entirely. Through all of it, something else was also happening, slower and quieter than the sabotage. Desmond had started staying in the study later than the work required. He'd ask Naomi questions that had nothing to do with contracts, what her mother had been like, whether she missed the coast, since she'd mentioned once growing up near Brunswick, whether she'd ever wanted to leave Georgia entirely. She found herself answering honestly, surprised each time by how easy it was to talk to a man the rest of the house was afraid of. Then came the watch. Desmond had a limited edition piece, a gift from his late father, that he rarely wore, but always knew the location of. It went missing from the study drawer on a Thursday. By Friday afternoon, Felicia had announced, in the break room, loud enough for 3 people to hear, that she'd seen the new girl near that drawer the night before, dusting where she had no business dusting. "I never touched his drawer," Naomi told Desmond directly, refusing to let the accusation sit unanswered in a room she wasn't in. "I know," he said. He opened his desk, lifted a false panel at the back, and produced the watch himself. "I moved it last week. I forgot to mention it." He studied her face for a long moment, the firelight catching the tired set of her jaw. "You didn't even ask me to check the cameras. Would it have mattered if I had?" "No," he admitted. "I already believed you." That night, Auntie Pearl, the cook, who had been with the Calloway family since before Desmond could walk, found Naomi sitting alone on the back porch steps, watching the dark pecan trees sway against a sky thick with the kind of low Georgia clouds that promised rain by morning. "That girl, Felicia, she's been counting your steps since the day you walked in," Pearl said, setting down a plate of cornbread Naomi hadn't asked for. "People like that don't fear what you've done. They fear what you might become if nobody stops you first." "I'm not trying to become anything, Miss Pearl. I'm trying to finish 90 days. Pearl sat beside her, slow and certain, the porch swing creaking once under their combined weight. Raising a person is a lot like growing a garden, baby. You don't just plant it and walk away. Somebody's been watering you without you even noticing. Question is whether you let it take root, or you keep telling yourself you're just passing through. Naomi didn't answer. She only pulled the handkerchief from her bag, the way she did most nights now, and ran her thumb along the faded stitching, until the silence between her and Pearl felt less like a question and more like rest. The Hartwell deal closed on a Tuesday night, 91 days after the folder hit the floor, and Desmond did something he had not done in 11 years. He celebrated. It was a small, quiet thing, a bottle of his father's wine, saved for an occasion he'd never let himself have. He invited Naomi into the study, told her she was done, that the debt was settled, that he had legal drafting her a permanent contract as director of estate operations. They talked longer than either of them planned to. The fire burned down to embers. The wine, meant for one toast, became several, the conversation drifting somewhere neither of them had let it go before, about his parents, about her mother, about two people who had spent years building walls, so carefully they'd forgotten what the walls were keeping out as much as what they kept in. Neither of them planned what happened next, and neither of them was thinking clearly enough that night to stop it. By morning, Naomi was gone, before the house woke, and neither of them spoke of it for 3 full weeks, both of them certain that silence was the safest, kindest thing they could offer each other. The silence ended the morning Naomi fainted in the pantry. Auntie Pearl found her on the floor, color gone from her face, and called for Desmond, before she called for anyone else. He carried her to the nearest chair himself, his hands unsteady in a way the house staff had never once seen them. I'm fine, Naomi kept saying, even as Pearl pressed a cool cloth to her forehead. I just need a minute. She did not need a minute. She needed, as Dr. Renata Adeyemi confirmed 2 days later in the same quiet study, where the folder had first fallen, about 7 more months. I'm pregnant, Naomi said to Desmond, that evening, the words coming out steadier than she felt. From that night, I wasn't going to tell you like this. I wasn't going to tell you at all, if I'm honest, until I figured out what I wanted to do. Desmond sat very still, the way he did when a number on a balance sheet didn't add up, and he was deciding whether to trust it anyway. You weren't going to tell me, he repeated. You made it clear, the next morning, that it didn't happen. I respected that. I made it clear, because I didn't know what else to do, with something I wasn't prepared for, he said. That's not the same as not wanting to know. If a moment like this one has ever pulled something loose in your own chest, that ache of two people too proud and too careful to say the thing that's true, that's exactly the kind of story this channel exists to tell. Hit subscribe before the next wave hits, because what happens at the front door of this house, just 1 day later, changes everything Naomi thought she understood about her own name. The butler's voice carried down the hall the very next evening, low and uncertain. Mr. Calloway, your grandfather is here. He says it's urgent. He says it's about a girl from the Whitfield family. Desmond's face changed before Naomi's did. My grandfather doesn't make house calls. Not at this hour. Not for anyone. Charles Calloway entered the study leaning on a cane he didn't need for balance, so much as for emphasis, his eyes finding Naomi before they found his grandson. Turn toward the light, child, the old man said. Grandpa, what is this? Quiet, Desmond. Charles studied Naomi's face the way a man studies a photograph he hasn't seen in 20 years. Your mother's name. Say it. The woman who raised you. Loretta Carter, Naomi said, startled. Sir, what's happening? And what did she give you? The thing you carry. I know you carry something. Naomi's hand went to her bag, without her permission, fingers finding the worn cloth inside. She drew it out slowly, the faded M catching the firelight. Charles Calloway sat down, without being asked, as if his legs had simply stopped negotiating with him. That handkerchief belonged to Eleanor Whitfield, he said. Eleanor and her husband Robert built half of what the Calloway name now stands on. 50 years, as our closest business partners, almost family in every way, that mattered except blood. That cloth was sewn for their daughter. Maya Whitfield, lost in a car accident on Route 9 when she was 4 years old, the same week the Whitfield-Callaway Logistics Partnership was supposed to be signed. We searched for 11 years. We never stopped, and we never closed that partnership, either. Eleanor said she couldn't sign anything that felt like moving on. No one moved. Desmond looked at his grandfather, then at Naomi, then back again, searching for the part of this that was a mistake. Grandpa, handkerchiefs don't prove anything. People lose things. Things get passed around. I am not finished, Charles said, and something in his voice made even Desmond go quiet. There's a man named Otis Reyes. He drove for the Whitfield family for 30 years. He kept a journal he never showed anyone, out of shame, because he believed the accident was partly his fault for taking the back road that night. He found me 2 weeks ago. He gave me that journal before he passed. Desmond didn't argue with his grandfather again. Instead, he did what he always did. When the ground felt unstable, he gathered information before he gathered feelings. We're not doing anything based on a journal and a piece of cloth, Desmond said. If this is real, it survives a DNA test against the Whitfield family line. If it's not, I want to know who's behind it before anyone gets hurt twice. And there's already enough in this house that needs the truth right now. He called Dr. Adeyemi that same night for a second matter entirely, sworn to discretion, before she even unpacked her kit. He didn't tell Felicia. He didn't tell the house staff. He moved the paternity confirmation for Naomi's pregnancy through the same private channel as the Whitfield identity test, 3 counties over, paid in full and in cash, so no invoice would ever pass through an office where rumors traveled faster than paperwork. He told no one either result was coming except his grandfather, who for the first time in years did exactly as he was told. In the days, while they waited, Desmond pulled Otis Reyes's journal apart line by line, the way he once pulled apart a $40 million contract on his knees on the study floor. Otis had written in a careful, looping hand the entry from that night describing a 4-year-old girl pulled from a wrecked car seat clutching a handkerchief so tightly that the paramedics had to pry her small fingers open one at a time. He'd written about the chaos at the scene, the wrong hospital records, a family in shock, who never thought to ask the right questions in the right order before the trail went cold. He'd written, in the final entry, I have carried this for 30 years because I was afraid that telling the truth meant admitting I never looked hard enough. I hope this finds her before it finds me. He found her 2 weeks before he died, Desmond said quietly, closing the journal. That's not a coincidence I'm comfortable calling luck. Naomi, for her part, did the only thing she knew how to do under pressure. She kept working, kept her face calm, and waited, the way she had learned to wait, through every uncertain season of her life. She didn't tell Annie Pearl about the baby yet. She didn't tell Felicia, who watched her, with new and obvious suspicion now, certain that something was shifting in the house that hadn't been explained to her, the one person who believed she deserved to know everything first. But at night, alone, Naomi pulled out the handkerchief and turned it over in her hands until the fabric softened further at the folds, whispering the only thing she had left to hold on to. Some things stay lost, she said to the empty room, until the truth is ready to find them. Both results came back the same Friday morning, delivered to Desmond's private line, before the house staff had even started the coffee. He read them standing in his study, still in the shirt he'd slept in, the early light coming weak and gray through windows that hadn't yet been opened for the day. He read them twice. Then he walked them, himself, down the hall to the small office, where Naomi was reviewing vendor contracts like it was any other day, her pen moving steadily down a column of figures, her hair still damp from a shower she'd rushed through to be at her desk on time. Naomi. His voice was different than she had ever heard it. Not the voice of a CEO, not the voice of a man collecting a debt. It cracked, just slightly, on the second syllable of her name. You're Maya Whitfield. The girl my grandfather's oldest partners lost on Route 9 30 years ago. And this child, he set the second envelope down beside the first, his hand not quite steady, is mine. Both of them are true. Both of them, this morning, just became real. She set the contract down very carefully, the way someone sets down something they're afraid will shatter if they move too fast. Her hand stayed flat against the desk for a moment, as if she needed the wood to confirm it was still solid beneath her. "Say the first part again," she whispered. "You're Maya Whitfield. You were never lost to that family because anyone stopped looking. You were lost because the road, that night, took everything except the cloth in your fist." The room had gone very still. Outside, a single bird called from the pecan trees, and nothing answered it. It was at that exact moment, the moment a woman who had spent her whole life paying debts she never owed finally heard her own name spoken back to her in full, that Felicia Drummond chose to make her last mistake. "This is absurd," Felicia said, from the doorway, arms crossed, voice too loud for the room, the sound of her heels against the hardwood sharp and deliberate. "A DNA test from some discount lab, and suddenly the cleaning girl is a Whitfield, and pregnant by you, no less. Mr. Calloway, I've protected this house for 9 years. I won't watch it get handed to someone who fell out of a folder onto your lap." "Felicia," Desmond's voice went very quiet, which everyone in that house had learned was the only warning they would ever get. "Tell me something. The night the watch disappeared, who actually moved it from my drawer?" The silence in the room had weight. Felicia's mouth opened, then closed. Her arms, still crossed, tightened slightly, the only outward sign that the ground had just shifted beneath her. "I asked you a direct question. I was trying to protect this family," Felicia said, the bravado thinning with every word, "from someone who didn't belong in it. You tried to get an innocent woman fired from a job she was bleeding herself dry to keep," Desmond said. "And it turns out she belonged to a family this house owes 30 years of unfinished partnership and unfinished grief to before either of us ever knew her name." He didn't raise his voice once, and somehow that made it worse for her than shouting ever could have. "Pack your office. Security will walk you out within the hour." If you've ever watched someone finally get to say the true thing they were never allowed to say, and watch the room go still around them, you already know why stories like this one matter, and why it means something every time someone new decides to subscribe and stay for the next one. This next part is the one I think you'll want to see all the way through. Charles Calloway, who had been standing by the window through all of it, finally spoke again, quieter now, the urgency drained out of him and replaced with something closer to grief and relief at once. He crossed the room slowly, the cane tapping a soft rhythm against the floor, and took both of Naomi's hands in his. "Maya," he said, testing the name like it might break in his mouth. "Eleanor Whitfield kept your room exactly as it was. 30 years. Same wallpaper. Same little reading lamp by the window. I used to tell her it was foolish, holding on to a room for a girl who might never come back through that door. She told me hope doesn't need permission to stay foolish. I don't know how to be her," Naomi said, her voice breaking for the first time since the folder had fallen all those months ago. "I don't know how to be Maya Whitfield. I only know how to be the woman my mother, Loretta, raised, and now, soon, somebody's mother myself." "Then be all three," Charles said gently. "Loretta gave you a childhood when the Whitfields couldn't. The Whitfields can give you the truth now that she's no longer here to carry it alone. And that baby is going to need every single piece of you that all of this made. None of it erases the rest. It finishes what got interrupted." The weeks that followed were not simple, because truth this large rarely arrives simply, and a child on the way has no patience for anyone's pride. Naomi visited Loretta Carter's grave before she visited the Whitfield estate, kneeling in the grass to say the things she hadn't had the chance to say in time. The headstone was modest, set under a young dogwood tree that Loretta had asked for specifically years ago, back when she still had the strength to plant things herself. "You didn't just keep me safe," Naomi said, her fingers tracing the carved letters of her mother's name. "You gave me everything you had, and you never once made me feel like a debt you were owed. I'm carrying the Whitfield name now, and I'm carrying somebody new besides. I hope that's all right with you." The wind moved through the dogwood's branches, and for a moment it was the only answer she needed. Eleanor Whitfield, when Naomi finally stood in the doorway of the house she'd been carried out of 30 years before, didn't ask a single question about the DNA results, or the journal, or any of it. She simply crossed the entry hall, slow and disbelieving, and held her daughter the way a person holds something they were told, for 30 years, they'd never get to hold again. I kept telling myself hope was foolish, Eleanor said, into her daughter's hair. Charles used to say the same thing. We were both wrong, and I have never been so glad to be wrong in my life. Charles Calloway, in the quiet that followed both confirmations, finally admitted something he had been carrying since the night he walked into that study. I knew who you might be before the journal confirmed it, he told Naomi and Desmond both, sitting in the same study, where the folder had first fallen, the fire low and steady in the same hearth. Otis came to me, with suspicion, not certainty, nearly 3 weeks before that night. I could have run the test privately and quietly, without ever letting your paths cross the way they'd already crossed. Instead, once I realized you two had already found each other on your own, before I ever said a word, I decided the truth could wait one more evening to arrive the way it needed to. You let us sit with it, Desmond said, half disbelief, half something gentler. I gave the truth room to land in a house that already had a little grace in it, Charles said, unbothered, swirling the last of his tea in its cup. What you two did with that room was your own business. I only wanted to see if either of you had a real heart before the rest of the world found out who you both actually were. An old man doesn't get many chances left to test the people he loves. I used the one I had. There's something almost unbearable about watching two people who were too careful, too proud, and too afraid finally tell each other the truth. And if that lands the way it landed for me writing this, do me a favor and subscribe before you go. I've got more stories like this one waiting, and I don't want you to miss the next family that learns this same hard, beautiful lesson. Calloway Holdings underwent its own quiet reconstruction in the months that followed. Felicia Drummond's termination opened an internal review that found 2 other instances of staff being pushed out under manufactured suspicion, both reversed, both compensated, both given formal apologies signed by Desmond himself. The House office adopted a new rule, posted plainly where every new hire could read it. No accusation moves forward without the accused present and the evidence shown in daylight. The Whitfield-Calloway Logistics Partnership, frozen for 30 years on Eleanor's quiet insistence that she couldn't sign anything that felt like giving up, finally closed that spring, not as a business arrangement, but almost as a formality, since the two families were already weaving themselves back together in every way that mattered more than paperwork. Desmond didn't wait for the baby to arrive before he made his intentions plain. He proposed on the back porch, where Auntie Pearl had once handed Naomi cornbread she hadn't asked for, the same porch where she'd once told him some things stay lost until the truth is ready to find them. He'd waited only until she felt steady enough to stand out there, with him, her hand resting against the small, certain curve of her stomach. I'm not asking, because of the baby, he said, the small velvet box steady in his hand despite how unsteady his voice had gone. I'm not asking, because my grandfather will gloat for a decade, if I don't, though he absolutely will. I'm asking because the day that folder hit the floor, I thought I'd lost 3 months of negotiation. I didn't know I'd actually found the only person who ever made this house feel less like a museum and more like a home, and I am done being too careful to say that out loud. You're not very good at romantic speeches, Naomi said, laughing despite the tears in her eyes. No, he agreed, but I'm very good at not letting people walk out the door once I've decided they belong inside it. I proved that with a 90-day contract. I intend to prove it for considerably longer this time. Auntie Pearl, watching from the kitchen window, with a dish towel still in her hands, said it best to no one in particular. Money can build a house, but it can't keep it warm. Took that boy 11 years, and 1 baby on the way to learn somebody has to choose to stay. Maya Whitfield Carter kept the handkerchief in a frame on her office wall. After that, not as a relic of what was lost, but as a reminder of what had finally, after 30 years and 1 accidental folder of papers, been found. On the days when the work felt heavy, and there were still those days, because grief and joy had never once canceled each other out, She would look up at that small square of faded fabric and remember that some things really do stay lost only until the truth and the people brave enough to wait for it are finally ready to find each other.